There's a moment I can't seem to shake, the kind that sneaks up when I least expect it. I'm scrolling through my phone, the blue light casting shadows on my tired face. Pictures of friends posting their new houses, vacations to places I've only dreamed of, cars that gleam under perfectly sunny skies, talk of investments and financial wins flooding my feed. My thumb hesitates, then quickly moves to close the app, as if shutting the screen might somehow close the ache in my chest. But it doesn't. That tightness lingers, a silent pressure that weighs down more than the hours I've clocked or the bills I've paid. It's not envy, at least not exactly. It's something deeper. Something like a cocktail of shame, frustration, and a gnawing fear that I am slipping further and further behind. I work. I try. I save what little I can. But the days, weeks, months, sometimes years, seem frozen when I look at my finances. Like I'm trapped in a loop where no matter how many times I try to break free, the same tired story repeats. My paycheck stretches just enough to cover the basics, and any dreams I have feel locked away like secrets I'm too embarrassed to say out loud. Yet, what stings the most is not the numbers on a bank statement. It's the way this quiet, invisible ache starts to eat away at my confidence and my sense of self. It's strange how isolating it feels, even though so many others must struggle with it too. I catch myself constantly comparing, even though I know it won't make me feel better. Why do they seem so far ahead? Did they get lucky? Did they figure something out I missed? Was I too slow to make the right choices? Questions like these swirl through my mind, sometimes without me even noticing. I feel haunted by them. The truth is, I start believing that prosperity, ease, the kind of freedom that others talk about, it's just not meant for me. Maybe it's reserved for a different kind of person, someone smarter, luckier, or born with a different script. This feeling of lagging behind is more than just a vague, annoying thought. It's a psychological barrier. Suddenly, I'm not just worried about money. I'm afraid to try, afraid to risk, afraid to fail again. The very thought of facing another setback, or even the discomfort of change feels unbearable. It's like my brain has slipped into a defensive mode, building walls where doors used to be. And even when a chance to move forward appears, I find myself stuck, paralyzed by the weight of invisible chains wrapped tightly around my will. One night, I admit to myself, not without a twinge of vulnerability, I'm not only financially stuck, I'm emotionally drained. The constant comparisons, the self-questions, the hidden shame, they aren't just abstract feelings. They are living inside me, shaping how I think, act, and what I believe about what I deserve. It's exhausting and deeply lonely. Yet something shifts in me when I reach this place. Not the place of despair, but the quiet moment before change. I realize this pain, as raw and bitter as it feels, is also a signal. A sign that beneath this ache lies a door I can open. A chance to see clearly what's really holding me back, beyond the numbers, beyond the social media highlights, beyond the stories I tell myself about worth and timing. If I can face this quietly burning hurt with honesty and care, I might find a way to reclaim my power and rewrite my story. This isn't just about money. It's about the stories I have carried, the comparisons that steal my joy, and the fear that keeps me frozen. It's about understanding how these forces operate beneath the surface, quietly shaping my every choice, even the ones I don't realize I'm making. And the truth is, I'm ready to step through that door. Not by following someone else's path or chasing someone else's timeline, but by starting from where I am, feeling fully what's true in this moment. If you've ever felt this way, if you've closed the app and felt the squeeze in your chest linger, you're not alone. This shared, seldom spoken pain isn't a flaw. It's a part of our human experience that wants acknowledgement. Today, I want to take you with me on a journey beyond those feelings, to explore how this quiet suffering shapes our financial lives, why it's so hard to break free, and how, by shining light on it, we can find a way forward that feels real, grounded, and deeply healing. So before you scroll away, take a moment to lean in. Let's sit with that discomfort, the shame and fear that whisper, "You're behind." Because in that shared vulnerability lies the first spark of transformation, and that spark might just be the beginning of something new. I remember one evening, sitting in my dimly lit living room, the glow from the street lamp casting long shadows on the walls. My mind was racing, not with plans or hopes, but tangled in a web of what-ifs that felt heavier with each passing minute. It was as if my own thoughts had become a theater, replaying scenes of missed chances and missteps, each one spotlighting a sense of failure I couldn't shake. The more I tried to push these feelings aside, the louder they echoed, like an unrelenting drumbeat in my chest. In that moment, I realized the impact wasn't merely in the facts of my financial situation, but in the way these inner narratives had shaped the way I viewed myself. I wasn't just struggling with dollars and cents. I was wrestling with a fragile self-image coated in doubt and insecurity. I found myself caught in what felt like a maze of mental traps, where the usual guidance, try harder, be patient, stick to the plan, felt distant and inadequate. Instead, my mind seemed wired to expect setbacks at every turn, a quietly resigned acceptance that anything I attempted would somehow fall short. What's even more intricate is how this internal landscape warps our perception of opportunity. When an idea comes up, like applying for a new job or investing in a course, there's a subtle voice inside whispering, "What if it doesn't work out? Can you afford to try this and face disappointment again?" This hesitation isn't random. It's a sophisticated defense mechanism crafted over time. It's designed to shield me from the sting of failure, yet ironically, it puts me in a cage, stalling the very progress I desperately want. I liken it to someone standing at the edge of a cliff, aware of the vast sky and open horizons, but paralyzed by the invisible barricades erected by years of cautious thinking. This defensive posture also affects my relationship with risk, turning what should be calculated ventures into paralyzing dilemmas. For instance, I recall a conversation with a friend who eagerly explained their recent investment. Instead of feeling inspired, I was overshadowed by a quiet voice of skepticism, doubting how much of their success was luck or a hidden advantage I lacked. Instead of curiosity pushing me forward, comparison seeded suspicion and protective denial. It was a defense not just against external failure, but internal vulnerability. The vulnerability of imagining success when my own blueprint seemed flawed. I've also noticed this mental stasis creeping into daily financial choices. The hesitancy to make even small decisions out of fear of making things worse. Like standing before a menu at a restaurant, endlessly debating whether I can justify the expense, only to settle on the cheapest option even if it means sacrificing pleasure. I see this gesture reflecting a tremendous undercurrent of scarcity, a deep-seated conviction that resources are finite and mistakes are costly. That mindset, deeply ingrained, feels less like prudence and more like surrender. Yet, what feels paradoxical is the silent erosion of my intrinsic motivation, the drive that once sparked ideas, ambition, or hope. It's as if my emotional tank, once full of fuel, slowly empties under the weight of constant self-monitoring and doubt. I start to perceive progress in tiny increments, or worse, in stops and starts. There's a kind of invisible slowing down, where the momentum I need to initiate real change dissipates, replaced by repetitive, cautious patterns that maintain a fragile status quo. I also want to share a moment when I stumbled upon an old journal. Flipping through pages, I was struck by the contrast between who I had been, eager, optimistic, believing in possibility, and who I had become, tentative and guarded. It was painful to recognize these shifts, but equally enlightening. It revealed just how much time and emotional energy I'd been devoting to defending myself from potential disappointment, rather than nurturing my aspirations. That realization felt like uncovering a hidden weight I could finally start to lift. Imagine how these internal dynamics affect the very act of dreaming. When envisioning a financial future, the mind doesn't just picture goals. It filters them through a lens clouded by accumulated beliefs about what's realistic or safe. The dreams become muted echoes, whispers that retreat when confronted by the comfort of familiar caution. It's as though my imagination pauses at a fork in the road, hesitant to take the path less known, favoring the shadows of what feels certain yet stagnant. Now, consider how this applies when you face moments demanding bold steps or fresh moves. The invisible coordinator inside your head might be evaluating risks in a way that feels deliberate, but is actually a protective reflex shaped by past emotional bruises. This mechanism may be preventing you from exploring pathways that could lead to growth simply because it prioritizes safety over possibility, leading you to decline invitations, abandon plans, or turn opportunities down before they fully surface. Looking back, I see that breaking this cycle isn't just about gathering information or better budgeting. It is about gently recalibrating the inner voice that monitors and judges every decision. It's about learning to recognize when hesitation stems from protection rather than true judgment. When I start noticing these patterns, I find it easier to create moments of curiosity, where instead of retreating, I ask, what if this works? What if the risk is part of the journey instead of the endpoint? Those questions act like keys, gradually unlocking walls built over years. I've come to understand this process demands kindness above all. It's easy to beat myself up for feeling stuck, but true progress comes from embracing the current state with compassion, acknowledging the accumulated emotional scars as valid, and then, with care, turning toward new narratives. In time, this patience rewires how I experience risk and reward. It transforms hesitation from a lifelong barrier into an invitation for cautious, hopeful exploration. Although the road ahead is uncertain, I sense an emerging strength beneath the surface, one that allows me to hold discomfort without retreating, to welcome challenges without shrinking, and to see my financial path not as a verdict on my worth, but as a dynamic story still unfolding. That deeper awareness changes everything, making space for resilience where there was once only doubt. When I first recognized the weight sitting on my chest wasn't just financial strain, but an emotional anchor, I didn't realize its roots tangled deeper than mere circumstance. One evening, as I sat in a quiet cafe, I overheard a conversation between two strangers that seemed to mirror my own internal struggle, though from a different angle. They discussed impulsive purchases made to fill a void, a fleeting excitement masking an inner emptiness. That fleeting thrill of spending, followed by the crash of regret, sounded astonishingly familiar. It wasn't about money disappearing, it was about the emotions intertwined with those choices. I began to notice patterns in my own spending habits that felt counterintuitive. Sometimes I would painfully hold back on purchases that could improve my life, claiming it was prudence. But in truth, I was withholding myself from small joys out of guilt. Other times, I'd cave into buying things that offered temporary distraction or validation. This tug-of-war wasn't random. It painted a complex portrait of my relationship with value and self-worth. I realized that my financial behaviors functioned less like calculated decisions and more like invisible tugboats, pulled by currents I hadn't yet charted. One afternoon, I found myself staring at my credit card statement, feeling a strange disconnect. The charges weren't extravagant, but they hinted at emotional storytelling I hadn't acknowledged. A dinner I claimed was just a treat became a marker of loneliness, a small rebellion against the silence of solitude. A gym membership I barely used represented a hint at hopes for transformation hidden beneath layers of self-criticism. I'd been fulfilling emotional needs through my financial choices, not fully aware of the messages I sent to myself every time I swiped my card. Building on this, I realized the narrative running through my mind wasn't simply about scarcity versus abundance. It was also entwined with identity and belonging. Money was a language my emotions spoke, sometimes louder than words. Did I associate spending with permission to be present, or did saving feel like denying my self-worth? Every financial decision became a microcosm of an unspoken dialogue between my past and present self, fraught with complexities and unresolved tensions. There was an invisible ledger tracking not only dollars but the emotional deposits and withdrawals I made from my inner world. This awareness shifted when I encountered an old friend who told me about their own struggles with money ghosts, unseen emotional shadows triggered by financial situations. They described moments when a simple bill or receipt unleashed a flood of memories, anxiety, or shame. Hearing this coined term, I felt less isolated. It gave shape to the occasional waves of distress that had seemed to come from nowhere in my financial life. Soon, I realized these ghosts were often tied to memories of parental attitudes, childhood messages, or pivotal financial crises experienced long before I could even understand their influence. There was a turning point when I sat in a therapist's office and traced one of my most stubborn money myths back to an early life moment. I remembered my parents arguing late at night, their voices thick with tension over unpaid bills and missed opportunities. Though I was young, That atmosphere imprinted a lasting belief. Money meant conflict, failure, and instability. This association, etched deep into my psyche, explained why I often hesitated to celebrate financial progress or trust stability when it arrived. My mind was wired to expect the worst, like a warning signal flashing whenever I moved toward success, priming me to self-sabotage before I could even enjoy it. I started to examine these inherited beliefs carefully, like a detective piecing together clues from my formative years. I reflected on comments, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, that shaped my money narrative. We don't talk about money. Save every penny or you'll regret it. Rich people are greedy. Each phrase carried emotional freight that tethered my actions. I noticed how these beliefs didn't just influence spending. They colored my sense of possibility and goal setting. Ambition sometimes felt like a betrayal or privilege I hadn't earned, creating a silent barrier to dreaming big. At work, I saw these beliefs surface in unexpected ways. During conversations about raises or promotions, a quiet voice warned me, "Don't ask, don't expect." That hesitation wasn't laziness or lack of skill, but a psychological safety mechanism rooted in messages internalized long ago. It took conscious effort to challenge this self-imposed ceiling. When I did risk stepping outside this comfort zone, I wasn't met with instant failure, but with surprises, unexpected support, positive feedback, and opportunities that contradicted my cautious assumptions. One day, a simple exercise helped me unravel the knot further. I wrote a letter to my younger self, articulating compassion for the child who absorbed these messages unknowingly. I acknowledged the pain of growing up in a household where financial security felt fragile and unpredictable and promised to nurture a new, kinder perspective, one that embraced learning, growth, and patience. As I did this, it felt like the old tapes labeled "Never Enough" began to stutter and fade, replaced by fresh stories inviting curiosity and courage. Gradually, I started to see the emotional roots of financial hesitancy not as weaknesses to conceal, but as signals guiding my attention. When doubt arose, I began to ask, what old belief might I be repeating now? When anxiety surfaced around money, I explored which ghost from my past was stirring. This process transformed moments that once felt paralyzing into invitations to grow. I discovered that understanding the stories beneath my financial habits was not about blaming my history, but about reclaiming choice. Through this exploration, a new landscape emerged in my mind, one where financial decisions could be informed by wisdom rather than fear, where setbacks were recognized as part of learning rather than proof of inadequacy, and where I could quietly rewrite my relationship with money to reflect resilience, compassion, and authentic self-respect. This wasn't a sudden transformation, but a subtle evolution. Like the gradual blooming of a flower after winter's hold gradually loosens, revealing the capacity for renewal and hope. I remember one particular afternoon when I found myself staring at an unopened bill on my kitchen counter, its presence looming like an uninvited guest. Instead of reaching for it right away, I noticed my body tensing, my breath growing shallow. It wasn't simply avoidance. It was this strange hesitancy rooted deep within. I caught myself crafting all kinds of excuses, even though I knew the sooner I faced it, the sooner I could act. That moment made me realize how much my mind had developed clever detours designed to keep me safely numb. Digging deeper into this, I recognized how this inertia was a subtle, persistent guardian denying me entry into new financial territories. It's like when a ship's captain hesitates to sail because the ocean's surface feels too vast, too unpredictable. My internal compass, shaped by countless past experiences, preferred familiar shores, even if they led nowhere significant. I noticed how this self-imposed limitation seeped into opportunities where movement was possible, silently whispering, "Stay here. It's safer." A sharp contrast happened during a coffee shop conversation with an acquaintance who'd recently started making bold financial moves. She spoke openly about grappling with moments when she wanted to retreat, how inner resistance tried to pull her backward after every forward step. Yet, she had this ritual that intrigued me. Whenever doubt crept in, she'd write down 3 potential benefits of a decision, however small they seemed. This practice catalyzed my own thinking. It illuminated that the mind's resistance wasn't an enemy but a misunderstood signal, one that, if navigated thoughtfully, could coexist with progress instead of blocking it. This insight shifted my perspective dramatically. Instead of seeing hesitation as failure, I began to view it as a complex dialogue within myself. Now, when faced with financial decisions, I watch for the subtle emotional cues tied to uncertainty and interpret them as invitations to slow down and reflect, not stop or retreat entirely. I started journaling these moments, imagining my doubts as guests I could welcome rather than barricade. With this approach, the paralysis loosened its grip just enough for me to experiment with small, manageable risks, building confidence slowly but steadily. One vivid scene stands out. I was nervous about investing a modest sum, haunted by lingering doubts of what if it goes wrong. Instead of pushing myself to leap or dismiss the feelings, I turned inward and captured those uncertainties on paper. Then, I contrasted them with realistic hopes, the chance to learn, the possibility of growth, and reclaiming a sense of agency. That exercise didn't erase my concerns, but it reframed the mental space I occupied. The ocean wasn't so tempestuous anymore. It felt navigable, like finding a calm harbor amidst the waves. This gradual transformation offered another profound realization. My struggle wasn't solely internal. Social narratives surrounding success and failure amplified the pressure. Growing up in a community where financial achievement was often discussed in hushed tones or wrapped in judgment, I internalized a sense of shame about my pace of progress. That societal backdrop functioned like static in my mental radio, occasionally distorting or drowning out more nuanced signals about my own potential. Recognizing this helped me separate external noise from my authentic circumstances and aspirations. Moreover, I started to notice how comparison functioned less like a neutral observation and more like a subtle trap, sapping energy and clouding judgment. When scrolling through peers' accomplishments, the mind would often spiral into scenes where I was perpetually outpaced. But instead of allowing these moments to breed despair, I tried a different tactic. I imagined my journey as a personal novel instead of a public race. This shift created space for self-compassion and curiosity. Where curiosity took root, old barriers softened, opening pathways I hadn't spotted before. I won't pretend this shift was painless or immediate. There were days when old reflexes erupted fiercely. But each time I recognized the pattern breaking through, I learned to pause and remind myself that the sensation of being behind was less a verdict and more a prompt to listen carefully. Listening brought me closer to understanding how layered these experiences are, at once emotional, cognitive, and deeply influenced by the socio-cultural echoes around us. A breakthrough arrived when I approached my financial challenges like a puzzle rather than a burden. Instead of expecting overnight fixes, I treated each small success and setback as a clue. In this way, I moved from a place of dread into a gradual unveiling of my capacity to influence my own trajectory. This stance opened me to experimentation, tempered by self-awareness. I felt less like a prisoner to circumstances and more like a student exploring an evolving craft. Now, when I reflect on those moments of pressure and hesitation, I see them as invitations rather than threats. They signal where I need to pay attention to my thinking processes and emotional triggers, points where old defensive patterns manifest. Each recognition creates a space to reorient, recalibrate, and move forward deliberately. It reminds me that transformation isn't a sprint, but more akin to tending a garden, requiring patience, care, and trust that new growth will emerge in time. The moment I first confronted the weight of my financial paralysis was unexpectedly jolting. I was sitting alone in a crowded coffee shop, the hum of conversations swirling around me, but trapped inside my own thoughts. My gaze drifted to a stack of unopened mail beside my laptop, each piece a reminder of decisions I'd been avoiding. Suddenly, a profound realization struck me. My fear wasn't merely about losing money or failing financially. It was rooted in an exhausting cycle of emotional self-protection that had become nearly impenetrable. The invisible barrier wasn't built from spreadsheets or budgets. It was constructed out of internalized fears and narratives that whispered, "Stay put. Don't risk more pain." I remembered a scene from a few months earlier when a close friend invited me to join a workshop on financial resilience. At first, I hesitated, telling myself that I wasn't ready or that the timing was off. During the car ride home, She gently pushed back, asking why I was so resistant. Her words lingered. Sometimes, the scariest step is the one toward ourselves. That stuck with me because it spotlighted the truth that my reluctance wasn't about external factors, but internal voices that had long been trained to protect me from disappointment, even at the cost of growth. Inside my mind, I grappled with an unexpected rivalry, a paradox between my desire for progress and the impulse to hold steady. It was as if two versions of me were negotiating control, one nudging toward opportunity, the other clinging tightly to the comfort of known patterns. This internal tug-of-war created a kind of emotional whiplash, leaving me drained and reluctant to make decisions that carried uncertainty, despite recognizing their potential to unlock change. During one restless night, I found myself reflecting on the paradox of security. I imagined emotional safety as a delicate glass dome encasing me, shielding me from harm, but also trapping me in stasis. Any movement risked cracking this fragile barrier, threatening to shatter the illusion of control I had clung to for so long. It occurred to me that what I mistook for prudence was, in many ways, a reluctance to face the vulnerability embedded in financial evolution, the unknown chapters one feared to write. One afternoon, I decided to take a small, deliberate step past this invisible fence. I called a financial coach, someone recommended to me by another friend. The initial phone call was brief but charged with tension. Admitting to a stranger that I felt stuck was unsettling, but her calm and non-judgmental voice peeled back layers of guardedness. She said, "It's okay to feel afraid. The fear signals you're stepping into unfamiliar terrain. Let's explore that together." Those words opened a door I hadn't dared to knock on before. It was less about immediate solutions and more about permission to sit with discomfort without letting it dominate my decisions. In the days that followed, I began to experiment with this newfound mindset through a simple but profound practice. Each morning, I jotted down 3 small intentions focused on cultivating curiosity and compassion toward my fears around finances. Some mornings, my notes were raw and conflicted, others, hopeful and tentative. This daily ritual felt like planting seeds in rocky soil, requiring patience and gentle nurture, even when growth wasn't immediately visible. Another vivid memory surfaces from a weekend hike with my partner. The trail we followed was steep and winding, littered with loose stones and unexpected obstacles. Several times, I stumbled, unsure whether to press forward or turn back. My partner's steady presence was a reminder that progress isn't always linear. Sometimes the path requires slowing down, reassessing footing, and embracing struggle as part of the ascent. That metaphor settled deeply within me. Financial progress, I realized, could also accommodate pauses and recalibrations without signaling failure. Over time, the internal dialogue shifted subtly but perceptibly. Rather than automatic shutdowns or retreat, moments of hesitation became openings for deeper inquiry. What am I truly feeling right now? Where does this reluctance stem from? Is this protective instinct or an invitation to learn? This level of self-awareness felt like acquiring a new lens through which I could recognize and honor my emotional landscape rather than battle it. Yet one of the most surprising discoveries was the realization that acceptance and courage aren't opposites. They dance together. Allowing myself to acknowledge uncertainty and discomfort didn't diminish my capacity to take risks. It enhanced it by reducing the background noise of self-judgment. When I stopped trying to silence my fears, they gradually lost their power to immobilize me. During one particularly challenging week, faced with unexpected expenses and wavering motivation, I revisited an old journal. Scrawled pages reminded me of moments when I had persisted despite doubt, when courage appeared in small acts, paying off a bill, scheduling a financial check-in, saying yes to opportunities I'd previously declined. These recollections offered tangible proof that resilience was embedded within me all along, not as a mythic ideal, but a quietly steady presence beneath the surface. Now, in the midst of daily uncertainties, I recognize that progress isn't about racing to catch up or matching anyone else's pace. It's the deliberate process of navigating my own emotional currents, tending to fears with honesty, and choosing growth over comfort in moments that matter. This approach has started to transform fear from an unscalable mountain into a landscape I can traverse step by cautious step, discovering strength in the journey itself. One evening, as twilight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across my cluttered desk, I sat staring at a financial app that had become both a source of information and silent torment. It wasn't just that numbers refused to budge. It was the invisible barricades my mind erected each time I contemplated making a change. I recall a sudden flash of frustration mingled with helplessness. What blocked me wasn't absence of resources or opportunity, but an entrenched psychological barricade that guarded a fragile sense of identity scarred by fear of judgment and failure. I remembered a conversation with my mother years ago when I was still hesitant to speak openly about my financial concerns. She remarked, with an almost casual tone, "We never brag about what's in our wallet, but if it's empty, people will know soon enough." Those words echoed back like an unspoken rule, conditioning me to keep my money struggles hidden, even from myself. It created a strange form of emotional invisibility. I concealed my anxiety, hoping it would fade invisibly, yet it only intensified. This lesson buried deep inside me taught that vulnerability equaled weakness, and that concealing insecurity was synonymous with maintaining strength. In that moment, I became aware that my reticence was not mere inhibition. It was a complex dance around self-worth. When peers spoke freely of their successes or displayed the hallmarks of financial confidence, I instinctively recoiled. This withdrawal wasn't born out of envy but a self-protective measure, an instinct to guard my inner fragility by pretending everything was intact. It dawned on me that my emotional relationship with money was tangled with an elusive desire for acceptance, safety, and dignity, challenges that no budget or spreadsheet could solve alone. One afternoon, while waiting in a bustling cafe, I observed a man seated nearby. He was talking animatedly on the phone, sharing plans about a new business venture. His face radiated a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I saw in him a vulnerability similar to my own, masked by enthusiasm. That moment served as a mirror, confronting me with the paradox that courage often appears in tandem with fear. I visualized my own journey similarly, acknowledging discomfort, yet choosing to move forward despite it. This recognition helped loosen the injunction of silence I'd wrapped around my struggles. I picked up a notebook that evening and wrote a letter to an imagined future version of myself, a person who had found peace with their financial narrative. Pen meeting paper made the intangible tension tangible. I admitted frustrations, hopes, and confusion openly and without judgment. This practice, unaccustomed as it was, created space for dialogue within, a space where I could separate my evolving self from inherited fears and narratives about scarcity. Through this inner conversation, I began gently untangling the threads of self-doubt woven into my financial decisions. One day, an unexpected phone call sparked a profound shift. An old college friend reached out to share her own admission of financial anxiety, exposing a side of her I had never known. She spoke not with shame, but with raw honesty about setbacks, missteps, and slow progress. Her story wasn't a tale of defeat, but an unfolding process of acceptance and trial. Hearing her voice erased layers of isolation I hadn't realized I carried. Our vulnerability, I learned, became a mutual balm, reframing fear as a shared human condition rather than a personal flaw. Conversations like these planted seeds of courage. They urged me to rethink the narrative framing my experience, not as a static sentence engraved with failure, but as an evolving chapter punctuated by learning and resilience. This shift opened doors to resources I'd previously dismissed, like financial education groups and coaching. Enrolling in these programs provided me with tools not just for managing numbers, but for addressing the emotions threaded into every decision. Moments that once ignited panic were now opportunities to practice patience, self-compassion, and steady commitment. At work, I began applying these insights. Instead of quick judgments or avoidance when budgeting discussions arose, I started inviting questions rooted in curiosity. What are my priorities? What fears emerge when I think about investment or saving? This openness altered my relationship with colleagues and finance alike, transforming hard conversations into growth-oriented dialogues. I realized that transparency, in increments tailored to my comfort, became an unexpected source of empowerment. One night, hunched over a small pile of receipts and bank statements, I experienced a subtle but undeniable shift. Instead of despair, I felt a quiet determination rippling through me. I pictured my financial life as a mosaic assembled piece by piece, each decision adding a tile, sometimes imperfect, yet forming a pattern over time. This image helped me embrace imperfection and gradual progress as integral parts of the journey rather than evidence of shortcomings. There was also a surprising discovery in revisiting my own inner voices. Some contained impulses of self-judgment and scarcity, yes, but others whispered hope, creativity, and resilience. I began listening not to silence my doubts, but to understand their origins and to invite the alternative voices into the frame. By nurturing these contrasting perspectives, I gradually rewove my mental framework, balancing caution and optimism in tandem. Navigating this internal landscape proved no straightforward path. It involved moments of profound discomfort and self-questioning. Yet, each step into vulnerability peeled back layers of shame, clearing a path toward authenticity. My evolving relationship with finances transformed into a dialogue between past wounds and future aspirations, a space where I could hold both anxiety and ambition without being overwhelmed by either. This journey revealed a crucial truth. Financial healing isn't solely about building external security, but about cultivating internal sanctuary, spaces within myself that honor complexity, embrace patience, and acknowledge progress in all its forms. From this place, I sensed a tentative but real possibility of rewriting my narrative to reflect not just constraint and caution, but resilience, newfound clarity, and emerging freedom. There was a moment when I caught myself hesitating before logging into my online banking account. My fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard, a wave of anxiety rising unexpectedly. It wasn't about the numbers I might see. I already knew the balance was tight. Instead, a flood of competing voices whispered doubts and critiques, casting shadows over what I should do next. This internal cacophony revealed a complex mechanism at work, one where my beliefs and emotions scripted an intricate dance that controlled not just actions, but my entire sense of possibility. The trick was realizing how deeply my self-perception had woven itself into my financial choices. I struggled with an inner image shaped by past disappointments, societal messages, and private fears. I pictured myself as someone who barely scraped by, someone destined to lag behind. When I considered spending, saving, or investing, that mental portrait weighed heavily, sometimes subtly demolishing confidence before any action could begin. It was as though my mind built a hall of mirrors, each reflection reinforcing old stories of inadequacy. At work, this dynamic played out in unexpected ways. During a budget meeting, I caught myself downplaying my role or dodging questions that hinted at leadership opportunities. I was reluctant to advocate for a raise or coaching support because deep down, I believed I wasn't worthy of those benefits. That belief wasn't manifesting through egotistical pride, but through an almost paralyzing self-sabotage masked as humility. It created invisible ceilings that imprisoned my potential, convincing me that anyone stepping beyond this boundary risked exposure or failure. One afternoon, I confided in my closest friend about this pattern. She paused thoughtfully, then said, "It sounds like your story about yourself has become real to you, but it may be a story you inherited and rehearsed so often that you forgot you could write a new one." Her words struck a chord, sparking a quietly rebellious thought. If my inner script controlled so much of my behavior, what if I dared to become its author instead? What if I rewrote the narrative that dictated what I believed I deserved financially and personally? With that notion planted, I turned toward examining how specific beliefs anchored my actions. For instance, I uncovered the assumption that financial success was a zero-sum game, that if others thrived, I must lose out. This scarcity mindset bred competition and resentment, preventing collaboration or openness that might otherwise unlock possibilities. Another buried conviction held that money equated directly with character, that struggling financially marked me as less responsible, less capable, less good. These implicit biases shaped an emotional scaffold that reinforced patterns of avoidance and risk aversion. The process of untangling these convictions reminded me of slowly peeling layers off an onion. Each layer held tiers, but led closer to a refreshed core. Through reflective journaling, I caught glimpses of alternative narratives emerging. What if abundance wasn't finite? What if my worth didn't come attached to my bank balance? These questions weren't easily answered but opened cracks for curiosity, allowing me to witness my internal world with less judgment and more wonder. Interestingly, this effort shifted my perception of failure. Rather than defining failure as a final verdict stamped on my financial record, I began to see it as feedback, an essential part of learning rather than a sign of defeat. This subtle shift altered how I approached decisions fraught with uncertainty. Where anxiety once stopped me cold, I started sensing an invitation to engage more actively, to explore possibilities with cautious optimism instead of withdrawing. One vivid episode illustrates this transformation. I planned to enroll in a professional course that required a significant financial commitment. Previously, just thinking about the cost would have ignited a spiral of worry. This time, I gathered facts, anticipated challenges, and imagined potential outcomes before sitting quietly with my fears. The hesitation still surfaced, but I reframed it as a sign of growth rather than paralysis. Ultimately, I committed and, in doing so, reclaimed a fragment of agency that had lain dormant. During informal conversations with coworkers, I also noticed myself sharing more openly about financial goals and frustrations. This transparency broke down unspoken taboos, turning solitary struggles into communal stories of resilience. Hearing others' candid experiences revealed that these psychological impasses weren't individual failings, but shared human conditions, further diluting shame's grip. In that exchange, I found unexpected reservoirs of connection and support. At home, I started involving my partner in budgeting discussions with unprecedented honesty. Our dialogues grew from transactional exchanges to explorations of values and dreams. Money stopped being a silent monster lurking behind closed doors and became a shared project, a canvas where we could paint future possibilities shaped by aligned intentions instead of fears. This partnership strengthened my motivation and diffused internal resistance, nourishing a powerful sense of shared purpose. As these shifts unfolded, I recognized that my cognitive biases, those invisible filters skewing perception and decision-making, were less immutable than previously believed. With patience, I learned to spot patterns such as confirmation bias, where I selectively noticed evidence that reinforced doubts while ignoring progress. By cultivating mindfulness, I developed a capacity to pause before reactive thoughts hijacked my thinking, inviting gentle challenge and compassionate reframing. These psychological tools equipped me to dismantle old habits of self-sabotage. For example, when confronted with unexpected expenses, my first impulse was no longer avoidance. Instead, I began breaking down the challenge into manageable steps, seeking advice, and allowing myself to feel frustration without catastrophizing. Each small victory built resilience, proving to myself that setbacks could coexist with perseverance rather than extinguishing it. Ultimately, this journey illuminated that financial behavior is inseparable from deep psychological architecture, beliefs, biases, and emotional roots that govern much of our daily navigation. Recognizing and reconfiguring this internal software is crucial to unlocking sustained progress. The real work goes beyond budgets and spreadsheets. It ventures into the realm where mind and heart shape each choice. This deeper understanding granted me a measure of freedom I hadn't dared imagine before, a freedom to experiment, to risk, and to grow despite uncertainty. When I first acknowledged the tug-of-war between my desire to move forward financially and the gripping hesitation that often stopped me in my tracks, I realized the turmoil extended beyond conscious thought. It burrowed deep, mingling with subtle biases and emotional triggers that quietly dictated my choices. One evening, I found myself hesitantly considering an opportunity to invest in a side project. On the surface, the numbers made sense, but a whisper of doubt instantly followed, urging me to retreat. I listened carefully and noticed that my mind was replaying scenes from past disappointments, not events themselves, but the feelings they left behind. On that night, I sat quietly analyzing the voice inside, noticing it used shadowed language, a series of what-ifs that resembled old warning signals rather than grounded reflections. It was as if my brain carried a compendium of cautionary tales, each stored like an unhealed scar pointing me toward survival by avoiding risk. Yet survival doesn't always align with growth. I wondered then, what would happen if I learned to disarm these automatic alarms, seeing them as automatic responses instead of immutable truths? One early morning, while sipping coffee on my worn porch, I watched the sunrise filter through slanted curtains. That gentle unfolding of light offered a metaphor I clung to. Growth is rarely explosive. It reveals itself through patient, quiet emergence. This insight impressed upon me the need to approach financial change gently, allowing my mind time to introduce new narratives that might replace the covert messages urging caution. Another important realization came during a conversation at a local community center, where a facilitator spoke about the emotional architecture behind money decisions. They described how past experiences act as blueprints, influencing our brain's wiring and shaping risk perception almost subconsciously. While this sophisticated language was new to me, the concept resonated deeply. I pictured my financial hesitations as internal bricks cemented from childhood stories and repeated fears. No wonder dismantling them felt daunting. The work demanded deliberate effort. Inspired, I decided to keep a trigger journal for a week, recording situations where anxiety or avoidance surged around money. I chronicled moments like passing on a promising freelance gig or delaying bill payments despite available funds, behaviors that puzzled me before. As I documented these episodes, patterns emerged. Certain phrases in my mind repeated, such as, "I might mess this up," or "it's safer to wait." These refrains revealed mental tapes I'd looped long enough to accept unconsciously, programming self-limiting decisions. Recognizing these ingrained scripts was only the beginning. It became clear I had to actively interrupt their cycle. I experimented by creating alternative thought pathways, rehearsing affirmations quietly when my mind veered toward doubt. For instance, when faced with financial uncertainty, I responded internally with, "This is an opportunity for growth, not judgment." Replacing old patterns felt awkward initially, like learning a foreign language, but over time, the new phrases began to settle into my psyche, softening automatic defenses. At work, I noticed subtle shifts too. During negotiations, instead of shrinking from assertiveness, I cautiously tested expressing my needs and desires. This wasn't a dramatic overhaul, but a series of micro steps. A stuttered proposal, a tentative question about budget flexibility, each a gentle rebellion against ingrained caution. The surprise came when my colleagues responded with openness and value for what I offered, shattering my assumptions that stepping up equated to overreaching. Evenings brought moments of reflection when I opened my laptop to research financial literacy with fresh eyes. Previously, such pursuits elicited overwhelm, but now the curiosity sparked by new understanding coaxed me forward. I meandered through articles and webinars, savoring small revelations about compound interest or budgeting strategies that honored my emotional limits. Learning became less a chore and more a quest, intertwining intellect and inner resilience. One transformative afternoon, I sat with a trusted mentor who guided me through visualization exercises. She invited me to imagine standing at a crossroads, a metaphor for decision points I often faced financially. Instead of freezing, I pictured walking down a path lined with supportive signposts, each representing a resource or strength I possessed. This imagery dismantled a habitual mental block, illuminating that the discomfort I felt wasn't a chasm, but a threshold inviting exploration. In embracing these practices, I grew increasingly aware that my brain's survival strategies, patterns rooted in facing past hardship, didn't have to dictate future actions. Instead, they could become signals prompting mindfulness and intentional choice. By cultivating self-attunement, I found moments of clarity where indecision had ruled before. The process resembled untangling an old knot, messy and time-consuming, yet rewarding when threads began to release. I came to understand that shifting these underlying mental frameworks demands patience and compassion toward oneself. I treated setbacks not as failures, but as data points in a broader learning curve. On days when fear prevailed, I leaned into small rituals that anchored me: a short walk, journaling, or sharing thoughts with a trusted friend. These gestures fortified my emotional reserves, allowing me to face financial challenges with renewed courage. Now, when I confront decisions that trigger anxiety or hesitation, I pause to acknowledge their origin without judgment, gently reframing the story I tell myself. This practice has cultivated a new style of internal dialogue characterized by curiosity and possibility instead of fear and limitation. It's an ongoing journey, but one where even the smallest forward steps ripple into meaningful transformation. As I pause here, with the weight of countless thoughts swirling inside me, it becomes clear how the pieces intertwine in a dance I never fully recognized before. Each insight and feeling have layered over time, weaving a tapestry both delicate and dense, shimmering with possibilities and shadows alike. I feel the echoes of tension, hope, fear, and resilience reverberate within, as though they were strands of music composing a symphony whose crescendo has yet to unfold. It strikes me how elusive progress can be when navigating a terrain mapped not in roads or landmarks, but in shifting currents beneath an opaque surface. The patterns of hesitation, the whispers of past wounds, and the comforting yet confining stories we hold all swirl like eddies pulling the tide in directions both familiar and confounding. Through all that, a subtle transformation has been stirring, a nuanced awakening of awareness that bends perception without breaking it, like sunlight filtering through stained glass, casting fragmented yet vibrant colors on walls once blank. I recall moments when discomfort knitted tight around my chest, a tension that silently demanded both confrontation and patience. Within those moments, an unvoiced dialogue was taking shape, one where gentle curiosity edged out judgment, where surrender mingled with resolve. It's as if I've learned to read beneath the surface currents, glimpsing the underpinnings that shape not just my choices, but the whole architecture of how I engage with my future. This growing insight invites me to meet myself with kindness while holding a steady gaze toward change that is intangible yet palpable. There's a certain kind of quiet bravery emerging, not loud or triumphant, but persistent and intimate. Like the first buds of spring daring to bloom after a long, cold winter, it signals the subtle promise of renewal without demanding instant transformation. These tender stirrings echo through my day-to-day. A shared glance, a hesitant step forward, a willingness to sit with uncertainty instead of wrestling it away. I sense the contours of a path forming beneath hesitant feet, a journey less about escaping the past shadows and more about illuminating a space in which something new might grow. What fascinates me is how these inner shifts resonate beyond my mind, rippling out into the impressions I leave in conversations, choices, and even silence. There is a newfound patience in dialogue, an openness that nurtures connection rather than isolation. It dawns on me that the walls built of fear and comparison soften not with force, but through the gentle erosion of understanding and empathy, for myself and for those whose stories intertwine with mine. In these shared moments, vulnerability loses its sting and becomes instead a bridge spanning hidden divides. As these realizations settle within me, I notice a deeper willingness to engage with complexity, to accept that progress is rarely linear or predictable, and that growth often travels through meandering, sometimes shadowed paths. Embracing uncertainty becomes less abstract and more visceral, an experience of balancing on the edge of discomfort while holding on to flickers of hope. There is power in this tension, fertile ground where transformation seeds itself in the subtle interplay of courage and surrender, challenge and acceptance. Reflecting on this journey so far, I recognize the compelling alchemy at play. How courage entwines with hesitation, how old narratives shed their dominion when met with compassionate reflection, how the mind's protective instincts reveal themselves less as enemies and more as guides in disguise. Such revelations gently dismantle the myths that have held me captive, inviting me instead to inhabit a space of self-trust undefined by external benchmarks or comparisons. The horizon ahead feels both inviting and mysterious, like a landscape draped in early morning fog that promises new vistas once the sun rises fully. Within that ambiguity lies the essence of what's possible, a quiet invitation to move forward without certainty, to build resilience in moments of doubt, to cultivate a deeper sense of agency grounded not in perfection but presence. I sense that the narrative I carry is poised for renewal, not in denial of struggle, but in full embrace of the human complexity that shapes financial growth and emotional healing alike. So as I stand here, at this threshold of unfolding, a stirring of anticipation pulses through me. It is a call to approach what lies ahead with open eyes and an open heart, to honor the intricate dance between past and future, fear and hope, paralysis and action. The chapters waiting to be written shimmer just beyond reach, promising a story imbued with wisdom, patience, and relentless possibility. I recall the moment when the heaviness in my chest no longer whispered but spoke clearly, a message I could no longer ignore. It wasn't a fleeting pang or vague discomfort. It had grown into a persistent companion accompanying every glance at social media feeds, every casual discussion about money, every quiet night wondering if I was drifting further behind an invisible line drawn by others' successes. In that space, I realized the agony wasn't about dollars or digits. It was woven with a profound ache rooted deeply in my sense of self and belonging in a world that seemed to sprint ahead without me. As I sit with those memories now, the image that comes to mind is of someone reaching out in darkness, hands trembling but seeking a tether to something steadier, a pulse, a spark, a sign that progress remains possible. What I have come to understand is that my struggle embodies much more than financial hurdles. It is a narrative etched from layers of uncertainty, quiet despair, and fragmented hope, elements that conspire to obscure the horizon with fogs of comparison and unrelenting self-doubt. I see now how subtle and insidious the patterns were, cloaked in thoughts that whispered limitations I had accepted as truth. They took root in the shadows of childhood lessons, cultural murmurs, past mistakes, and unmet expectations, so thoroughly that questioning them felt like disrupting a fragile balance. Yet, beneath those apprehensions was a concealed urge, a yearning to rewrite the story, to reclaim a sense of agency that had quietly slipped away unnoticed over time. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden burst of clarity. Instead, awareness unveiled gently, like dawn spreading its light softly across a landscape long concealed by night. I learned that healing begins within the cracks where vulnerability seeps in, not in the grand gestures of financial overhaul, but in small moments of honesty, acknowledging fear without flinching, inviting curiosity where resistance has taken root. Through that intimate dance between acceptance and resolve, the invisible walls started to shift. One night, I sat with my thoughts, writing a letter to the self that had carried all those burdens silently. With each word, I breathed life into a gentler truth, that worthiness does not surge from bank statements or social approval, but from the capacity to hold both struggles and strengths in a tender embrace. The letter was less about manifesting immediate change and more about kindling a seed of compassion capable of nurturing a new path forward. I carry that letter with me as a reminder. Progress rarely unfolds along a straight line. Some days are footsteps forward, others pauses, yet each movement belongs to the rhythm of growth. When doubt crowds my mind, I listen, not to silence it immediately, but to trace its origins and understand its purpose. It feels like tuning an instrument that once played only dissonance, now learning to harmonize with a fuller, richer melody. Our stories around money are often shrouded in isolation, but I have found resonance and healing in shared vulnerability. Speaking honestly with others about fears, failures, hopes, breaks the illusion that these weighty experiences belong only to me. It humanizes the abstract struggle, transforming it from a personal failing into a collective challenge faced by many. That realization gently dissolves shame's grip and invites solidarity instead. I also recognize that lasting transformation intertwines with patience. The mind constructs elaborate architectures of belief and habit. Dismantling them demands time and tender persistence. It requires a willingness to celebrate small gains, to stumble without surrendering, and to cultivate grace in the spaces between striving and resting. Now, as I stand poised between the past and what lies ahead, I hold a paradox close. Strength resides not in invulnerability, but in embracing uncertainty. Courage blossoms amid hesitation, Freedom grows when I allow myself to be imperfect and still deserving. With this wisdom, the sensation of being left behind becomes less a verdict and more a challenge to redefine success on my own terms. I understand that real abundance emerges not from comparison or conquest, but from reconnecting with my deepest values and allowing them to guide the journey. To anyone who finds echoes of their own struggle in these words, I offer this. The path toward healing is neither swift nor linear, but every single step you take carries infinite potential. Lean into the discomfort of your story with kindness. Cultivate patience around your progress. Hold open the possibility that the life you envision, one of clarity and resilience, is welcoming you forward even now, quietly, patiently, irrevocably. As we navigate this together, may courage find a home in our hearts, and may we build futures that honor not just the numbers we tally, but the profound humanity at their core.